Hallelujah.
All right, Jeremiah chapter 12, verse 10. Although from 10 to 10 through 13 is just a preface, so you understand a little bit what's going on here. Many pastors have destroyed my vineyard. They have trodden my portion underfoot. They have made my pleasant portion a desolate wilderness. They have made it desolate, and being desolate, it mourneth unto me. The whole land is made desolate, because no man layeth it to heart. The spoilers are come upon all high places through the wilderness, for the sword of Yahweh shall devour from the one end of the land, even to the other end of the land. No flesh shall have peace. They have sown wheat, but shall reap thorns. They have put themselves to pain, but shall not profit. They shall be ashamed of your revenues because of the fierce anger of Yahweh. Thus saith Yahweh, against all mine evil neighbors that touch the inheritance which I have caused my people Israel to inherit, behold, I will pluck them out of their land, and pluck out the house of Judah from among them. And it shall come to pass, after that I have plucked them out, I will return, and have compassion on them, and will bring them again, every man to his heritage, and every man to his land. And it shall come to pass, if they will diligently learn the ways of my people, to swear by my name, Yahweh liveth, as they taught my people to swear by Baal, then shall they be built in the midst of my people. But if they will not obey, I will utterly pluck up and destroy that nation, saith Yahweh. Thank you for the reading of your word, Father. Matthew Henry has some very interesting takes on these verses, of which I thought I'm just going to read you a lot of what Matthew Henry said and interject a few of my own thoughts as we go. So keep in mind what we just read to the best of your ability. This is going to be a complicated one, which is why I wanted so desperately to have a straight, clear head on this one. But if I goof up, I goof up. A government built on love. This would be a part 2. And we're going to look at a subtitle is basically, but only built on love for those who will participate in it according to their Father's governing system. So let me read you what Matthew Henry says on these verses. The prophets sometimes in Yahweh's name, he says God's name, of course, and I should just read what he has here. The prophets sometimes in God's name delivered messages both of judgment and mercy to the nations that bordered on the land of Israel. But here is a message to all those in general who had in their turns been one way or other injurious to God's people, had either oppressed them or triumphed in their being oppressed. Now that's an interesting line right there. Had either oppressed them or triumphed in their being oppressed. Now, those of you who have been following this ministry know that I've found an amazingly huge amount of passages in Scripture where Father is very, very adamant towards those who have the least bit in collusion with those who would oppress his people or others, for that matter. There should be no oppression. That's wickedness and that's evil. Any part in that the Father doesn't like. So the Father's always going to punish those who have such issues going on in their lives. So as it just said, here is a message to all those in general who had in their turns been one way or other injurious to God's people, had either oppressed them or triumphed in their being oppressed. Observe, number 1, what the quarrel was that God had with them. They were his evil neighbors, Jeremiah 12:14, evil neighbors to his church, and what they did against it, he took as done against himself. That's important. What they did against it, his people, his nation, he took as though it was done against himself, and therefore called them his evil neighbors that should have been neighborly to Israel, but were quite otherwise. Note, it is often the lot of good people to live among bad neighbors that are unkind and provoking to them, and it is bad indeed when they are all so. These evil neighbors were the Moabites, the Ammonites, Syrians, Edomites, Egyptians, that had been evil neighbors to Israel in helping to debauch them and draw them from God. Therefore, God calls them his evil neighbors. And now they helped to make them desolate and joined with the Chaldeans against them. And who are the Chaldeans? The Chaldeans were basically the magicians, the magi, the secret society witches in essence. So they had joined with the Chaldeans against them. It is just with God to make those the instruments of trouble to us, whom we have made instruments of sin. Whom we have made instruments of sin. What have we made instruments of sin with in this land? But a government built on equity, money, power, greed, not of love. That which God lays to their charge is, they have meddled with the inheritance which I have caused my people Israel to inherit. They unjustly seized that which was none of their own. Nay, they sacrilegiously turned that to their own use, which was given to God's peculiar people. He that said, touch not my anointed, said also, touch not their inheritance. It is at your peril if you do. Not only the persons, but the estates of God's people are under his protection, Matthew Henry writes. And I would add, this little section here, Matthew Henry's touching on jurisdictional issues, is he not? Is this not Matthew Henry admitting that the Father very clearly says, if my people are in my jurisdiction, don't mess with them. Don't mess with my people. Touch not my anointed. Touch not their inheritance. Is this not very clear why there's an escape route that's always put in the beast side's deceptions? So that we're not being forced into captivity, but we're being deceived into captivity. Which is why those people who would not, that Christ should reign over them, literally, and come out from among them to then stand under the Messiah rather than under Caesar, why they then are bringing it upon themselves, which is we've seen in other parts of Scripture, in other studies in the past, where you can see in prophecy that it says in a prophecy, in the end times, the beast system is going to say, we didn't do it. They did it to themselves. They kicked themselves out of God's law system. It's in different wording. Of course, I'm paraphrasing. But it is at your peril. Anyone who would touch my anointed or touch their inheritance. It's about jurisdiction. So they can't force themselves on us. And I think the evil side knows this and has learned this. They don't understand prophecy. They don't understand a lot of things. But they do know one thing. Don't force us into a corner and there's no way of escape. Always leave the other side a way out where we could voluntarily just simply opt out of it. And God can't get angry at them. I strongly believe that those of us who have opted out of it are being protected by that very knowledge that the other side even knows. We better not mess with those people. Touch not my anointed. Touch not their inheritance. It is at your peril if you do. Not only the persons, but the estates of God's people are under his protection. Again, jurisdiction. He is the king of all kings. Don't mess with his subjects. We are his subjects. We are his servants. We are his workers. We are his people. Roman numeral number 2. What course he would take with them? He would break the power they had got over his people and force them to make restitution. I will pluck out the house of Judah from among them. This would be a great favor to God's people who had either been taken captive by them or when they fled to them for shelter, which would have been similar to what happened in Joseph's time when Joseph and his father came for food because of the famine issues. When they fled to them for shelter, had been detained and made prisoners, but it would be a great mortification to their enemies, who would be like a lion disappointed of his prey. This next line is interesting. The house of Judah either cannot or will not make any bold struggles towards their own liberty. But God will, with a gracious violence, pluck them out. A gracious violence. Will by his Spirit compel them to come out, and by his power compel their taskmasters to let them go, as he plucked Israel out of Egypt. Now, throughout all the ages, we've been always taught not to be deceived, not to willfully join in with them in the first place. Now, in Israel's time, it was a little different than we have in our time. And this is where a lot of people I've been talking to in recent years, and this is one of the reasons I'm glad this topic came up in my heart this week, hit just the right moments actually, so that it all fit together, where people don't understand that they can simply walk away from this government built on lust and greed and power, and simply walk right into the jurisdiction of the Father, and walk into that jurisdiction where they'll be protected. They could walk right into that government built on love and say, I want to be protected by my Father. I now see the error of my ways. We've been tricked into this beast system. I don't want a part of it anymore. And as Levi did, rise up, leave all, and follow him. In times of Israel, under Egyptian captivity, they weren't allowed to do that. You couldn't just up and leave. They were trapped there. They were slaves there. If they tried to leave, it would have been sort of like Nazi Germany work camps that had been slain. There was no leaving. That's why Moses had to scream out, let my people go. They wanted to go. They couldn't. In our time, it's voluntary. And our beast system has learned that. If we trick them into it, as Satan did in the garden the first time, oh, you can be as gods. Oh, is that right? Eve said, oh, let me taste this fruit. We've tasted it and we liked it. We just keep eating it, don't we, as Americans? We keep taking from this tree of the beast system's governance built on bribery. And we keep taking from it and taking from it, which does what? It gives more and more mandate to the beast system government to steal the sweat equity from our neighbors so long as we keep getting pieces of fruit from the tree. We help the beast government oppress our neighbors. Every time we do anything additional or anything new or anything updated that gives that beast system any further permissions or endorsements in its power. It's voluntary. Every part of this is completely voluntary. There's nothing mandatory, and the beast knows that not to do this. They've learned that much over the years. Now, if they turn around and start doing it, and start making things mandatory, that's when people will say, oh, well, now I have to make a decision because it's mandatory. No, they're missing the point. It's been voluntary, and they've been voluntarily staying a part of the beast system. Just as when Joseph's family and the rest of Israel came down to Egypt because there was a famine in the land. They came down, they should have spent 7 years there, got their 7 years worth of grain, and they should have went back home and stayed out of Egypt. And they could have done it at that point. What happened? They kind of liked the big buildings, they got fat and happy there in Egypt, and slowly but surely Egypt took control of their lives and made them slaves down there. And that's where we're headed here in America. We're still in a voluntary state. There's not a single thing that they're mandating on us. Those of us, I should say, that are not, Let me put this another way. Take two. If we haven't stepped into their system, and we've shown a complete rescinding of wanting to come out from among them, they can't mandate anything over us. If they do that, they know that the Father will then start stepping in for his anointed and their inheritance, just as this Bible passage here explains. So I think the beast has learned this, and it's just hoping to keep us tricked with the bread and circus distractions that are all around us. They knew how to do this back in the times of Rome, but not quite as sophisticatedly as they do today. Back then, there wasn't all the technology to keep people glued to television sets to watch 70 hours worth of football every week. Or other sports or other things like soap operas, and you name it. The bread and circus thing today is an absolute art. It's an amazing new second dimension to our world. As it said, the house of Judah either cannot or will not make any bold struggles towards their own liberty. They will not, because they're under the bread and circus distractions that they like. Just like when Joseph's family came for the grain, and they got used to the prosperity of Egypt. They liked the bread and circuses of Pharaoh's time, and slowly fell into the trap. It's a snare. It's a fowler's snare on a very large scale. They get entire nations. But as it says, but God with a gracious violence pluck them out, will by his Spirit compel them to come out, and by his power compel their taskmasters to let them go, as he plucked Israel out of Egypt. Well, again, we're not actually technically in captivity. It's completely voluntary. I've had people say, I'm not coming out from among them. I'm not going to give up my Social Security number. I'm not going to give up my driver's license until I know God's calling us out. When he reaches out his hand to call us out, then I'll know to come out. Well, they're looking for a sign. This is a wicked and perverse generation looking for a sign. His entire Bible says not to join them in the first place. Find me a book of the 66 books of the Bible that doesn't tell us not to be a part of such wicked things, and you'll surprise me. I think every single book of the Bible, somewhere, some way, shape, or form, teaches us how not to get ensnared with that kind of system in the first place. So these people, having been ensnared, finding the comfort there, and would rather stay in that comfort, they find pleasure in unrighteousness. Does that sound familiar? 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. They that had not a love of the truth, that they might be saved, rescued. They shall be sent the strong delusion. They shall be tricked into becoming words of the state, words of Pharaoh. Call it what you will. They are Caesar's people. They're no longer children of God by their own choice. They are there. If I was walking down Liberty Avenue here in Pittsburgh, which is our red light sort of district, it's not as bad as it used to be. Thank the Father for that part. At least that doesn't look as bad. But there's a couple parts in downtown Pittsburgh where you could get some entertainment with the right bucks to do the things you'd like to do. But if I walked past a place that I knew was a gentleman's club, if you want to call it that, and I knew I'm not supposed to go in there, but I go in there and I find that it's fun in there. It's the carnal pleasures I wanted. And I go in there and I spend weeks in there. And then I find out, you know what? I owe them a lot of money. So they tell me I got to stay in there and maybe do dishes every day until I pay my debt. Well, guess what? I could stay there because God's not calling me out. I'm waiting for him to call me out. Hey, folks, you shouldn't have went in the first place. We were tricked in. How many passages in the Bible do we hear about different things about how the woman waited for him, and he came around and she caught him and she kissed him, And she tricked him, and let's make love until the morning. The man of the house is gone and won't be back. We've been deceived into another lover's arms. The beast system has a lot of comfortable things built on that system of bribery. So we're all taking fruit from the tree because the beast is taking the bigger chunk of the sweat equity that we're giving away of our neighbors. It's a system of bribery. And we're getting the brothel end of it because that's the carnal side we like. And we won't let go of it. We don't want to come out from among them because it's comfortable there. So we look for excuses. We look for reasons to not want to leave the brothel. We like the red district. We're comfortable there. He would bring upon them the same calamities that they had been instrumental to bring upon his people. I will pluck them out of their land. Judgment began at the house of God, but it did not end there, Matthew Henry writes. Nebuchadnezzar, when he had wasted the land of Israel, turned his hand against their evil neighbors and was a scourge to them. The Father will make sure everyone's paid for all the evil when it's all done. And he'll wrap it all up and sweep up the area and clean it all up. Make sure everybody's gotten their just rewards. Roman numeral 3. And this one, I think, is the deepest section of it. What mercy God had in store for such of them as would join themselves to him and become his people. That's verses 15 and 16 he's referring to. They had drawn in God's backsliding people to join with them in the service of idols. If now they would be drawn by a returning people to join with them in the service of the true and living God, they should not only have their enmity to the people of God forgiven them, but the distance which they had been kept at before should be removed, and they should be received to stand upon the same level with the Israel of God, the true remnant of God. If they would be drawn by returning people to join with them in the service of the true and living God, he says. If you'd come out from among them and come back with the Father, then what mercy God would have in store for such of them, as would join themselves to him and become his people. Another issue here. This is very clearly showing, choose ye this day whom ye shall serve. It's a jurisdictional issue. Which law system do you want to live under? Give ye unto Caesar what is Caesar's, give unto God what is God's. The Messiah, again, was not telling us to split loyalties, give some money to the church and some money to Caesar. He was saying pay tribute either to Caesar or to God. Who do you think deserves your affections and your tribute? But the distance which they had been kept before should be removed, and they should be received to stand upon the same level with the Israel of God. So if you were once attached, come out from among them, and the Father will receive you again. He'll protect you again. This had its accomplishment in part when, after the return out of captivity, many of the people of the lands that had been evil neighbors to Israel became Jews. And it was to have its accomplishment in the conversion of the Gentiles to the faith of Christ. Let not Israel, though injured by them, be implicable towards them, for God is not. After that I have plucked them out, in justice for their sins and in jealousy for the honor of Israel, I will return, will change my way and have compassion on them. Now I'll stop here and say, make sure you folks understand, when he says he's going to pluck them out and pluck them out violently, in other words, we're going to get whooped for having been in there in the first place. It's just like if you were a 16-year-old and you end up in that brothel and your dad found out about it, he might go into that brothel and grab you by the ear and drag you out of there like a father should do for a teenager and take a belt to you so you'll never want to do it again. All right? Now, that's just an unusual example, but that's what I'm trying to say is sort of what I'm seeing here. The father's saying, yeah, I'm going to punish you. You're going to be refined for having been dumb enough to fall into that trap. I taught you, I tried to get you to read that Bible, try to get you to read these instructions and follow what I'm trying to teach you how not to get involved in that stuff. You did it anyway, sort of like the prodigal son. But now, after I show you how wrong it is with a firm hand, pluck you out violently, I still want to show you I love you and I'll bring you back. Do you want to be a part of this government of love or not? So after that I have plucked them out in justice for their sins and in jealousy for the honor of Israel, I will return, will change my way, and have compassion on them. Though being heathen, they can lay no claim to the mercies of the covenant. Yet they shall have benefit by the compassions of the Creator, who will, notwithstanding, look upon them as the work of his hands. In other words, even though they're not truly walking every day as his chosen people, which again, it's not by blood, it's not by birth. We fully understand now it's because we as an individual and as our families and our churches have chosen to follow that. That's what gives us the opportunity to be grafted back in, as the New Testament teaches us, which I believe always was available. So then they'll be looked upon as the work of his hands. They're still his children. Come back into his jurisdiction. Whether you believe you're what bloodline, it doesn't matter. What race, it doesn't matter. Come into his jurisdiction, his law jurisdiction, his statutes and judgments built on a law of love. Fall into his character. Realize that the Father has the right way to teach you. And as we're teaching on other classes, and coming up again in a couple days, the fifth commandment, honor thy father and mother in the Lord. I get passionate with this because I'm finding a lot of my friends and those that I love that just simply don't get this. And we're going to get to a point here that I'm going to show why they're not getting it. The Father is withdrawing his Spirit, but there's a point there at which if you really wanted to try it, if you really didn't want to die in the pits of hell, and you really stop what you're doing, you can possibly keep yourself from falling completely away. We'll get there maybe before I finish this up. But note, God's controversies with his creatures, though they cannot be disputed, may be accommodated. Those who, as these, have been not only strangers but enemies in their minds by wicked works, may be reconciled. He refers to Colossians 1:21 there. Observe here. He says in number 1, what were the terms on which God would show favor to them? It is always provided that they will diligently learn the ways of my people. That is, in general, the ways that they will walk in when they conduct themselves as my people, not the crooked ways into which they have turned aside. The ways which my people are directed to take. This is all about the rules. Note, there are good ways that are peculiarly the ways of God's people, which however they may differ in the choice of their paths, they are all agreed to walk in. The ways of holiness and heavenly mindedness, of love and peaceableness, the ways of prayer and Sabbath sanctification, and diligent attendance on instituted ordinances. These and the like are the ways of God's people. Those that would have their lot with God's people and their last end like theirs must learn their ways and walk in them, must observe the rule they walk by and conform to that rule they walk by and conform to that rule and go forth by those footsteps. Wow. He's not mincing words here. It's pretty clear. You have to go by the Father's system, his government built on love. By an intimate conversation with God's people, they must learn to do as they do. It is impossible to learn the ways of God's people as they should be learnt, without a great deal of care and pains. We must diligently observe these ways and diligently oblige ourselves to walk in them, must look diligently and work diligently, as he refers to Hebrews 12:15 and Luke 13:24, if you want to look those up. In particular, they must learn to give honor to God's name, what we're also talking about, by making all their solemn appeals to him. They must learn to say, Yahweh liveth, to own him, to adore him, and to abide by his judgment, as they taught my people to swear by Baal. It was bad enough that they did themselves swear by Baal, worse that they taught God's own people, who had been better taught, and yet, if they will at length reform, they shall be accepted. Observe, we must not despair of the conversion of the worst, no, not of those who have been instrumental to pervert and debauch others. Even they may be brought to repentance, and, if they be, shall find mercy. Those whom we have been industrious to draw to that which is evil, when God opens their eyes and ours, and I have that underlined, when God opens their eyes and ours, and we're praying that that's going to happen in a large way here soon, we should be as industrious to follow in that which is good. The Father determines what's good and what's evil, not man and his rules. It will be a holy revenge upon ourselves to become pupils to those in the way of duty to whom we have been tutors in the ways of sin. The conversion of the deceived may prove a happy occasion of the conversion even of the deceivers. Thus, those who fall together into the ditch are sometimes plucked together out of it. Number 2. What should be the tokens of and fruits of this favor when they return to God and God to them? They shall be restored to and reestablished in their own land. I will bring them again, every man to his heritage. The same hand that plucked them up shall plant them again, after we've been refined. Okay? That's my note. They shall become entitled to the spiritual privileges of God's Israel. He says in quotes, if they will be towardly and learn the ways of my people, will conform to the rules and confine themselves to the restraints of my family. I'm pausing there on purpose. Think about what I just said there. If they will be towardly, or go in that direction, and learn the ways of my people, will conform to the rules and confine themselves to the restraints of my family, then shall they be built in the midst of my people. Built in the midst of my people. They'll be planted there. Built. Just as the government is built on love. Everybody's built there, planted there. They're all a serious and permanent part of it. They shall not only be brought among them to have a name and a place in the house of Yahweh, where there was a court for the Gentiles, but they shall be built among them. They shall unite with them. The former enmities shall be slain. They shall be both edified and settled among them. The differences will all be gone. There won't be a difference between the Jews and the Gentiles. See Isaiah 56, 5-7, he says. Note, those that diligently learn the ways of God's people shall enjoy the privileges and comforts of his people. We will have the same privileges, rights, protections, but we have to walk in his ways, not the world's ways. And Satan and the beast system know that. They've got us tricked into their side so badly. About 99% of the world's population is in it. And they won't come out from among it because they are comfortable there. They're getting their bread in circuses just the way they want it. Okay? And lastly, Roman numeral 4. What should become of those that were still wedded to their own evil ways? Yea, though many of those about them turned to the Lord. In other words, what should become of the few who didn't want to do it, even though everyone else was doing it? Everyone else turned back to the Father. Well, if they will not obey, if any of them continue to stand it out, I will utterly pluck up and destroy that nation, that family, that particular person, saith the Lord. Those that will not be ruled by the grace of God shall be ruined by the justice of God. And if disobedient nations shall be destroyed, much more disobedient churches, from whom better things are expected. Well, that's all the Matthew Henry note on that, and that was kind of long, and I know that was, and I don't normally read an entire Matthew Henry excerpt like that, but he had it nailed. And obviously, he couldn't see into the future, himself living back between 1662 and 1714. He couldn't see that, what was coming today. And although he sees parallels, and he knows that the Bible's talking about in prophetic ways with the book of Jeremiah and others, I'm amazed with how the issues we're seeing now are being mistaken still, because people are willfully ignorant of the fact that they have chosen to voluntarily become a part of the beast system. They are in the beast system of their own accord. They're saying, I like Satan's system better. There's less worries here, or there's less to concern myself with here. And, well, I'm up in my years. The government now, the beast system, is taking care of me cradle to grave, and I don't want to worry about those things, at least for now. Well, I would have a different fear for you, because that system's starting to collapse and starting to implode on itself. I would be more fearful that if that collapses, while you're standing in the beast system, it's going to be too late for you to switch to the Father's jurisdiction after something like that happens. Just like all the people in Noah's time. Once the flood waters came, and they said, oh, Noah, we changed our mind, let us in. It's a little too late then, isn't it? The beast system is sort of very similar, like the flood. People are going to be caught up and swept up in the giant crash, the economic crash that's going to take place. And if you're not already in his jurisdiction, the Father's jurisdiction, when that happens, you're outside the ark of Father's jurisdiction and his protections and his providence. To be in his jurisdiction is in his government built on love. You have to have accepted it. You have to have been born again into the Father's jurisdiction, born again into the embracing that his will, his instruction for our lives is better than anything man has ever tried to do and ever will try to do. We can't look at Satan and say, yes, maybe we can create a better fruit and be like God's. It's not going to work. I can only see from this point, and this vantage point, in this point in time that we're in, a disastrous continuation of what we're seeing now. It can't get any better until the pendulum starts swinging the other way with those of us who might want to get back in the Father's jurisdiction, which is what we just read all about. The Father's saying left and right here, he'll pluck those out violently who don't willfully want to leave, and hopefully wake them up, which then would tie back in with what we've also said many times in Zechariah chapter 14. Those that are left of them who will then accept tabernacling with the Messiah. In other words, learning his ways. Don't forget the Messiah is the Word made flesh, his law, the book of the law. Those who want to learn it and embrace that system, they'll be spared. But a lot of people don't want to leave that system. That Social Security, they worked for it all our lives. Well, you shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have been in the brothel all your lives. Yes, we were all tricked into it at one time or another, right? Somehow. But Father's calling us out now. It's a voluntary system. You should have never been in there. The Bible is endlessly calling you out of such systems. You don't have to wait for a special invitation. Just like the people in Noah's time, they didn't need a special invitation. I'm sure the word was all over his area, at least, of the world. And I would think that probably the whole world knew about what Noah was doing, building a big boat, and it had never rained before, and to just continue on in their world of sin, to mock Noah. They probably all thought he was nuts. Just like a lot of people think some of us are crazy because we're too fanatical. Come out from among the system? What, give up your Social Security? Are you crazy? I got to be realistic about this. What would I do without Social Security? Is there going to be Social Security in the afterlife? I don't think there will be. I really don't think you're going to need a Social Security card given to you by a government system. I really don't think you're going to need a driver's license. I don't think you're going to need a birth certificate proving that you were born. I think your voice will say enough of that. Hey, I think I was born. Oh, okay. That's good. Yes. If you're able to vocalize the fact that you're alive, maybe you were born. You don't need a certificate to prove it. Coming out from among them is mentioned quite a few times in Scripture. But even more importantly and more numerous are the warnings not to get stuck in and among them. Be ye not deceived. Watch out for the fowler's snare. There's lots of scriptures. A government built on love does not trick people into wanting to be a part of it. It simply puts it in black and white, as the Father did with the Bible, lays it on our hearts and our hearts of flesh and our consciences and says, here's the right way that we should be doing everything. The Bible, being in black and white, verifies it across the board among all those that have hearts of flesh, so that there can't be minor differences of those who might want to see things a little bit different than the other. The Bible lays it out so that at least the generals are all laid out and cast in stone in a sense. A government built on love. The perfect law of love. It was cast in stone for our own protection. And yet we want nothing to do with it, even when it's so evident that we're about to be pummeled by this beast system in ways that are going to be absolutely horrendous. Any of you that have seen the movies Schindler's List or The Hiding Place with Corrie ten Boom or some of these other videos that we've seen over the years, you know that it could just come upon you suddenly. All of a sudden the government could just, run you over. Look what Pol Pot did. Look at Stalin. There's been dictators all over the world that just simply turned around and turned on their own people and just started murdering them in a great, amazing onslaught. It could happen any day here. And just as Rose says all the time, until the bodies start dropping, they might not pay any attention to what's happening. They're too busy with their bread and circuses. The distractions. It's too much fun. The difference between a government built on love and a government built on the beast system's deceptions is simple. A government built on love requires a little bit of responsibility. A government built on deceptions, everything's focused on fun, the here and now, the carnal enjoyments. I'd rather be responsible and make sure others also have fun when we all reach the hereafter in a government built on love. So I'm going to continue to pray that thy will be done, thy kingdom come on earth, thy government on earth as it is in heaven. The Father rules in the heavens. Well, you know what? I want he and his Son to rule on this earth as well. And those that would not that he should reign over them, if the Father has to slay them to stop this madness that keeps incrementally growing all around us, then I'm sorry, it's just going to have to take place. Those of us that are going to be violently plucked out, as the thief on the cross was plucked out of his routine, maybe they'll wake up before they're fully plucked out and may have a chance to see some of the mercy we just talked about. But again, I think it's going to take a lot more violence on this planet before we start seeing any real numbers coming around. And although I still subscribe to the Zephaniah chapter 3 ending that says basically he's going to give us a name and a praise when he turns back our captivity before our eyes, I still do believe that that's going to take place ultimately, where Father then wins in a glorious way of love over Satan's evils. But I think a lot of people are going to have to be consumed first, just as they were in the Exodus before they crossed the Jordan into the land of milk and honey, as we find also in Joshua 5:6. So, which side do they want to be on? Which jurisdiction? Do they want to be in the government built on love? Or do they want to be in the government built on the beast system's absolutely endless confusion, chaos, and wickedness? All right, well, that's enough for the message today. We'll stop here at this point and open up the lines for Q&A here in just a minute. So thanks for being with me.